A man writes a novel about the perfect woman with the help of a magical typewriter, and the next morning she comes to life and appears in his kitchen. And now, using that same typewriter, he can make her do whatever he wants. Let's find out how he uses his power. A young writer named Calvin dreams of a beautiful girl against the backdrop of a sunset. He doesn't have a girlfriend in real life, but he has a dog named Scotty. Calvin spends every day at his typewriter. He has already written quite a few popular novels, but now he is going through a creative crisis. Calvin's brother Harry invites him to a workout. The men talk about their relationships at the gym. Calvin admits that he finds it hard to meet a woman. After the workout, he goes to see his psychotherapist and complains that he can't come up with an idea for his new novel. The therapist suggests that he write at least one page about someone who loves his dog, Scotty. Despite his success and popularity, Calvin remains very shy and is afraid of excessive attention. After book signings and parties, he feels completely exhausted and hurries back home to Scotty. At night, the young writer dreams of that same girl again. She is an artist and wants to draw Scotty because she really likes this little dog. Calvin wakes up and immediately rushes to his typewriter. He starts writing a story about a red-haired girl in bright tights. Soon, Scotty brings his owner a woman's sandal. It's strange, but Calvin doesn't pay much attention to it. He is too absorbed in his novel. The man admits to the therapist that he's falling in love with the main character. He names the girl Ruby Sparks. She is 26 years old, loves the Beatles, can't drive a car, and always helps the weak. She isn't very practical and constantly forgets things. Ruby feels that her life is about to change dramatically. Harry comes to his brother's place, along with his wife Susie and their little child. The writer finds a woman's razor and deodorant in his bathroom cabinet. Calvin thinks these items belong to Susie. Harry finds a woman's bra on the couch. Calvin assumes that it was brought in by Scotty. Perhaps he even stole it from one of the neighbors. But that's not all. Calvin's drawer is full of women's underwear. Harry and Susie are convinced that their relative is hiding a girlfriend from them. In the evening, the brothers discuss Calvin's new book. Harry criticizes the novel because the main character is too perfect and unrealistic. Women like that don't exist in real life. Calvin is very upset. He sits down at his typewriter and writes another chapter of his story. In it, Ruby comes to visit him. They have dinner together by the pool, and she confesses her love to him. After that, they both jump into the pool, swim together, and enjoy every minute spent with each other. In the morning, Calvin wakes up to a phone call. It's his literary agent, Cyrus Modi. He wants to see the first pages of the new novel. Calvin runs to the front door and notices Ruby Sparks in his kitchen. The man is shocked and convinced that Ruby is a hallucination. Or maybe he's still asleep. However, the girl from his novel doesn't disappear. Calvin calls his therapist and asks for an urgent appointment. Meanwhile, Ruby is making breakfast in the kitchen. So that's who all the things that were in the writer's cabinets belong to. Calvin calls his brother and tells him what's going on. Needless to say, Harry doesn't believe that's possible and tells him to ignore these strange hallucinations. During the call, Calvin finds the phone number of one of his fans, a girl named Mabel. Calvin tries to sneak out of the house quietly, but Ruby notices it and insists on coming with him. They end up going together to the cafe where the writer is supposed to have a date with Mabel. Calvin asks Ruby to go shopping while he meets with his fan. Mabel is sweet, but not very bright. Ruby sees them together and throws a jealous fit. Surprisingly, Mabel can see her too. Calvin realizes that Ruby isn't a product of his imagination. She's a real girl. The writer runs after his girlfriend, scoops her up in his arms, confesses his love, and kisses her gently. So now Calvin has a real girlfriend, one he created himself. The only problem is that Ruby has no idea about it. They spend a wonderful time together and look completely happy. And why wouldn't they? She's the perfect woman for Calvin. The writer meets with Harry and claims that he wants to introduce him to Ruby. Harry is sure that his brother is having a schizophrenic episode, which means he needs a psychiatrist. Instead, Calvin takes Harry back to his house and shows him Ruby. And she appears to be real. Harry is shocked. He decides this must be some stupid prank and that Ruby is just an ordinary actress playing a role. He suggests that Calvin continue writing his book to see whether what he writes will come true in real life. If it does, then Calvin really did create this girl, and may even be able to control her. If not, she's just a fake, and they should call the police. Calvin agrees and writes that Ruby is fluent in French. She immediately starts speaking the foreign language.
Cal, est-ce que tu peux aller chercher le vin?
Calvin immediately corrects what he's just written, restoring Ruby's usual language. Calvin, Ruby, and Harry have dinner together. At one point, Calvin even starts to feel jealous of his girlfriend's attention to his brother. Still, Harry remains convinced that this all sounds too much like magic, and therefore can't be real. Calvin begs his brother not to tell anyone where Ruby came from. What's more, he promises never to write about her again, because she's already perfect and doesn't need to be changed in any way. Several months pass. Ruby really wants to meet Calvin's mother, but the writer refuses, explaining that his mother is a rather eccentric and strange woman. Eventually, however, he changes his mind and takes his beloved girlfriend to visit his family. Their trip goes wonderfully. They arrive at the home of Gertrude, Calvin's mother, and her boyfriend, Mort. The characters stroll through a large garden and enter a mansion that looks more like a temple than an ordinary house. Gertrude is an artist and Mort makes wooden furniture. Sociable Ruby really likes her boyfriend's family. She chats with everyone, plays various games, and enjoys all the attention. Calvin realizes that he's starting to feel jealous of his beloved. He's an introvert and wants to spend more time with Ruby alone. But this girl is completely different. She loves adventure and fun and can't live without them. Calvin becomes increasingly irritable, and before long, he and Ruby return home. The couple goes back to their familiar routine, but their relationship gradually grows more strained. Calvin longs for peace and solitude, spending his time reading books, while Ruby lacks social interaction and friends. She feels deeply lonely. Ruby wants to sign up for art classes and spend at least one night a week at her own apartment. She needs personal space. The girl starts making new friends, has dinner at a bar, and spends more and more nights away from home. Calvin is in despair. He's terrified that Ruby is going to leave him. The man breaks his promise and sits down at his typewriter. Calvin writes that Ruby feels miserable without him, and soon she comes back home. But now the girl becomes far too clingy. She won't let Calvin go to the bathroom alone, constantly holds his hand, gazes into his eyes with devotion, cries on his shoulder, and spends absolutely all her time with him. They look like Siamese twins. It's unbearable, even for an introvert like Calvin. Exhausted by his girlfriend's neediness, he writes that Ruby feels incredibly happy. Well, she's now cheerful all the time, constantly laughing and having fun, but Calvin realizes that her happiness is artificial, which only makes him even more miserable. He tells his brother about the problem, and Harry advises him to write a few more lines, saying that Ruby has become normal again. At first, Calvin doesn't want to do it, but it's impossible to live with someone who is constantly cheerful and carefree. It really does feel like schizophrenia. Calvin returns to his typewriter and writes that Ruby has become herself again. Sometimes she's happy, and sometimes she's sad. After that, her emotional state becomes completely unstable. She screams one moment, cries the next, then sinks into sadness, or bursts into joy. The writer invites his beloved to a party hosted by his mentor, Langdon Tharp. Calvin and the other writers discuss the film adaptation of his previous book, and then the main character runs into his ex-girlfriend, Lila. She's a writer too. As they talk about their work and their personal lives, Ruby wanders over to the pool, where Langdon starts flirting with her. The man invites her to go for a swim. Lila accuses Calvin of being emotionally distant. According to her, he always thought only about himself. That's exactly why she left him. Calvin finds Ruby by the pool. She has already taken off almost all her clothes, getting ready to swim with Langdon. The protagonist flies into a rage and immediately takes Ruby home. There, they start arguing and almost come to a fight. An angry Ruby screams that Calvin can't control her and says she's leaving him. Calvin replies that she is completely under his control and goes to his typewriter. He types a few lines, forbidding the girl to leave the room. It feels as if an invisible wall has appeared in the doorway. Ruby is terrified. Calvin shows her his novel and explains that Ruby Sparks is a product of his imagination. The writer can make her do anything he wants. Ruby thinks it's a cruel joke and refuses to believe him. Calvin types a few more lines, and the girl suddenly starts speaking French. But she doesn't know French. Ruby snaps her fingers, takes off her clothes, sings, then crawls on all fours and barks like a dog. After that, Ruby throws herself against the walls, confesses her love to Calvin, calls him a genius. In short, she does everything he writes. Before long, the girl collapses onto the floor, completely exhausted, and Calvin is overwhelmed with shame for what he's done. Ruby runs away and locks herself in one of the rooms. Calvin writes the final page of his novel. Once Ruby leaves his house, she will be free, forget the past, and no longer be under his control. The writer leaves a printed copy of the book and a love note outside Ruby's room. In the morning, the man is woken by his loyal dog, Scotty. Calvin sees that both his note and Ruby have vanished without a trace. Only the book remains. Harry comes over to support his brother. Some time passes. Calvin and Harry are playing golf. The protagonist complains that since his beloved left him, he can no longer write. Harry suggests that he write a story about Ruby and tell the whole truth about what happened. Readers would never believe it anyway. Calvin gets to work. He doesn't name the main character or reveal personal details about her life so as not to hurt the real Ruby Sparks. His new book is called The Girlfriend and is dedicated to Ruby. The novel becomes an incredible success. Calvin grows even more popular. Gertrude is proud of her son, and the writer's therapist is delighted that his advice has paid off. Calvin is walking Scotty in the park when he runs into Ruby. She is reading his new novel, and it seems she really likes the story. The girl remarks that Calvin looks familiar. The protagonist smiles and shows her his photo on the book cover. Then he sits down beside Ruby. The girl asks the writer not to tell her how the novel ends.